Magandang hapon po. Annyeonghaseyo, Yorbun. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you may be. Welcome to today's public lecture organized by UP Korea Research Center. I am Raymond Barreno from College of Social Sciences and Philosophy, UP Diliman, and I will be your moderator for today's event. We are delighted to welcome our participants joining us in the safety of their homes through Facebook and YouTube live streaming. We wish to greet everyone and hope all will have a fruitful learning experience this afternoon. Before we begin our program, we would like to remind our viewers of some house rules. You may send your questions and comments to our panelists throughout the event in the Facebook or YouTube comment section. Kindly introduce yourself with your affiliation when raising questions. The questions will then be collected and answered during the open forum. We are also reminded that the whole forum is a safe space and thus will not tolerate any form of bullying and trolling. The organizer reserves the right to remove those who will create any disruption in any part of the program. We would also like to inform you that this event will be recorded. Today's event is organized in celebration of the 72 years of diplomatic relations between the Philippines and Korea. Just yesterday, March 3, was the official day when diplomatic ties were established between the two countries. So today's lecture is very timely. Before we properly commence our lecture, let us have a glimpse of the Philippine-Korea Friendship Center located at Bayani Road, Taguig City via virtual tour.
Welcome to the Philippine-Korea Friendship Center, or PKFC. It is one of the 9 military shrines under the Department of National Defense Philippine Veterans Affairs Office. Located along Bayani Road, the center houses the PEFTOK Korean War Memorial Hall and the Philippine-Korea Technological Cooperation Center, or the PKTCC. Situated in a 6,000 square meter lot allotted by the Department of National Defense, the two-story structure comes with a touch of Korean architecture that provides a nostalgic feeling of being in the land of the morning calm. Funded by the Republic of Korea's Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs through the Embassy of the Republic of Korea, the project was conceptualized by PEFTOK Administrator Under Secretary Ernesto G. Carolina and then ROK Ambassador Choi Jung-kyu. With that said, we welcome you to the PKWMH Virtual Museum Tour. Upon entering the center, the PEFTOK Memorial Wall will capture your attention on the names of the 112 Filipino soldiers who gave the ultimate sacrifice during the Korean War. Beside the memorial wall is the National Historical Commission of the Philippines marker. Before we enter the Memorial Hall, here is the inaugural plaque of the building unveiled by then-President Benigno Simeon Aquino III along with Minister Park Sung-chun of the Republic of Korea. We are now inside the lobby of the Memorial Hall, which was inaugurated on the 29th of March 2012 as a tribute and honor to the 7,420 officers and men of the Philippine Expeditionary Force to Korea, who served from 1950 to 1955. Let us proceed to the mini gallery area as we showcase photo vignettes of past and present Philippine-Korean relations. The first 3 rows show the past with PEFTOK troops from their departure on 15th of September 1950, battles and CMO with the Koreans. The last two rows shows our PEFTOK veterans with the visit of then Republic of Korea President Lee Myung-bak. Considered as the father of the Philippine Expeditionary Force to Korea, President Elpidio Rivera Quirino, during his administration, the Philippines played a pivotal role in the United Nations Temporary Commission on Korea, in which Filipinos were part of the commission led by Mr. Rufino Luna. He wholeheartedly supported Republic of Korea's bid for independence on 15th of August 1948. During the deployment of the 10th Battalion Combat Team to Korea, President Quirino, in his famous Poor as We Are speech, that despite suffering from the ravages of war, we will help a neighboring nation in need. Years into the Korean War, President Quirino would send his son Army Lieutenant Thomas S. Quirino and son-in-law Air Force Lieutenant Luis Chito M. Gonzalez, 1953, first with the 19th BCT and latter with the 14th BCT. Welcome to the museum. Freedom is not free. You will see this adage on the monuments and memorials of the 21 nations that deployed air, ground, naval, and medical units during the Korean War. It is paid for with the blood of the fighting men and stained with the tears of the loved ones left behind. Acknowledges the emotional sacrifice made by the Filipino soldier and that of his family. We have divided the museum into two parts, with the left side covering the Korean story and general overview of the war, while the right side of the museum showcases the Filipino side of the story and the major battles that the PEFTOK participated in the Korean War. As we proceed, let us meet some of the war relics. Here we have the Browning Automatic Rifle, or BAR, which is an infantry support weapon utilized by the Allied forces, including our PEFTOK troops. Below is the RPD-44 machine gun, originating from the Soviet Union and is used by the North Korean People's Army and the Chinese Communist Forces. Five large panels chronologically narrates a backgrounder from the independence of Korea as a colony of Japan, the independence of the two Koreas, and the subsequent division of the peninsula between the communist and western sphere, with Pyongyang as the north's capital and Seoul for the south. The surprise invasion, which happened on a Sunday at 4 in the morning, that engulfed the peninsula into flames. The fast-changing battlefield progress between the two forces, the Incheon landing, the entry of the Chinese Communist forces, until the signing of the armistice in July 27, 1953. Why a surprise invasion or surprise attack? In the law of warfare, an invading nation has to inform the leadership of the South that it will be invading in a particular date and time. Hence, no ample warning was given by Pyongyang on that fateful Sunday. The Korean War was a battle between communism and democracy, with North Korea's aim of reuniting the Korean peninsula. It was a major conflict of the Cold War after the Berlin airlift in the Greek War of 1949. For 3 years, from 1950 to 1953, we were in combat against the North Korean People's Army and the Chinese Communist Forces. After the armistice from 1953 to 1955, PEFTOK helped maintain the peace and rebuild the Republic of Korea with the construction of roads, bridges, structures, among others. Subsequently, 6 large panels provide an overview of the conflict from the independence of the Republic of Korea. The primary panel shows the initial progress in South Korea after its independence and the elections that followed. Below the panel is one of the two cabinets in honor of Captain Conrado Diap, the highest-ranking Filipino officer who gave the ultimate sacrifice during the Battle of Yuldong. The cabinet contains his Medal for Valor and the Distinguished Service Cross from the United States and its accompanying citations. On the other hand, the second panel shows the actual invasion photographs and early troop movements. As you may have seen, can you compare and analyze the Korean People's Army? And the soldier of the Republic of Korea? We would love to hear your answers after the virtual tour. The cabinet below shows some of the personal artifacts of Captain Conrado Yap. The next panel focuses on the Incheon landing on the 15th of September 1950 and the other units of the United Nations Command. This was 4 days before the arrival of the 1st PEFTOK contingent, the 10th Battalion Combat Team, on the 19th of September 1950. The memorabilia cabinet shows the photographs of some of the military facilities named in honor of Captain Yap in the first Filipino film about the Korean War, which was written by then-war correspondent Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr. The fourth panel provides an overview of the Chinese intervention, which changed the outlook of the war, the Allied retreat and the Allies' initial counterattack. One of the photographs shows the known Chinese tactic of the human wave attack. As the first armed forces of the Philippines joined overseas operation, the display cabinet below attributes to those naval officers involved in the conflict, with Lieutenant Commander Emilio S. Iwanag as the sole naval officer embedded with the 10th BCT and the one who secured the Chaffee tanks for the BCT's reconnaissance company. While on the other side is Lieutenant Junior Grade Victor Jose, who played a pivotal role in the Navy's combat service support operations for the PEFTOK. The fifth panel shows the progress of the war through the Korean side and the armistice that followed. Some of the known signatories are shown. The memorabilia cabinet is a tribute to the UN war correspondent Benigno Ninoy Aquino, who was 17 years old when he arrived in Korea in 1950. He is one of the 8 Filipino war correspondents that covered the Korean conflict in its initial stages. Some of his articles can be seen here. The last panel shows the strength and casualties of the United Nations Command. The Philippines being the 6th largest among the UN contingent of the 5 battalion combat teams, the Philippines suffered 112 killed in action, more than 299 wounded in action, 41 prisoners of war, 40 of which are Philippine Army and 1 from the Philippine Air Force, and 16 missing in action to this day. The artifacts below shows plaques received by the museum in honor of the PEFTOK since its inauguration in March 2012, Notable among is the appreciation plaque from former ROC President Park Geun-hye in 2013 and from the Army Group of the Korean Military Academy who visited the museum also in 2013. As we continue our tour, above us are the hand-drawn images of the 7 PEFTOK battalion commanders, namely Colonel Mariano C. Azurin and Colonel Dionisio S. Ojeda of the 10th Battalion Combat Team, Colonel Salvador Absede of the 20th Battalion Combat Team, Colonel Ramon C. Aguirre of the 19th Battalion Combat Team, Colonel Nicanor T. Jimenez of the 14th Battalion Combat Team, Colonel Antonio de Vera and Colonel Reynaldo Mendoza of the 2nd Battalion Combat Team. Below are the image of the 16 M4A1 Sherman tanks and 1 M18 Hellcat tank destroyer that we deployed ahead of our PEFTOK troops to augment Allied armor. Beside is a nostalgic photograph of a veteran from our Revolutionary War for Independence bidding farewell and good luck to a PEFTOK trooper. Cabinet, on the other hand, contains the Taeguk Medal awarded by the Korean government to Major Maximo P. Young for his exploits during the Korean War, specifically during the Battle of Pudong in November 1950. Major Young is one of the 3 Filipino recipients of the Taeguk Medal. The others were Captain Conrado Yap and Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Pedro Q. Molina, who became the 4th Commanding General of the Philippine Air Force from the 5th of July 1957 to the 17th of July 1962. The second cabinet shows the memorabilia of then Corporal Lamberto Sibaya, one of the 41 Filipino prisoners of war captured in April 1951 and freed only in 1953. He is a cousin of former Philippine Air Force Air Defense Wing Commander Major General Nemesio Sigaya, AFP, retired. Beside the framed picture of Lieutenant Sibaya is a photograph of another Filipino prisoner of war, also captured on the same date as Corporal Sibaya, is Sergeant Juanito P. Magno of Iloilo City, the only Filipino among 200 American prisoners of war who went on a wintry death march during the war. At the photograph, he is welcomed by the 19th PCT Battalion Commander Colonel Ramon Aguirre and Navy Commander Santiago Noval of the United Nations Command, Philippine Liaison Group in Tachikawa Air Base, Tokyo, Japan. Before we proceed to the Philippine side of the museum, one of the museum's prime attractions are the 6 standees containing the history of the PEFTOK and the individual histories of each PEFTOK battalion combat team. What is unique is at the back of each standee are the roster lists of each PCT containing the names of the almost 7,600 Filipino soldiers who fought in the Korean War, as well as those from the Philippine Air Force, Philippine Navy, and the Philippine Liaison Group United Nations Command are included in the roster. 5 historical panels cover the Philippine story of the Korean War, and below it are the display cabinets containing the memorabilia each of the 5 BCTs. First panel signifies the museum as a shrine to heroism and solidarity with the Free World forces in combating communism during the Korean War. The cabinet showcase artifacts from the 10th Battalion Combat Team. Notable among is the spent cartridge of a Korean War vintage 105mm howitzer shell donated by the family of Private First Class Laru An. The second panel honors the extraordinary friendship between the Philippines and the Republic of Korea and the key personalities behind it. Foremost is President Elpidio Quirino and UN General Assembly President General Carlos P. Romulo. The panel also highlights the primary reason on the deployment of troops, including the Republic Act 573 or the Philippine Military Aid to the United Nations Act. On the other hand, the cabinet below features the personal items and photographs and war memorabilia of the 20th Battalion Combat Team. Two notable items are the plaque from the former President Fidel V. Ramos, noting him as the most distinguished Korean War veteran, along with the box-frame war from the 38th parallel dividing the border between North and South Korea. This particular item was donated by the family of the late Colonel Mariano Abaycar. Subsequently, the third panel covers the deployment and arrival of the battalion combat teams to Korea from 1950 to 1955. While the cabinet shows the artifacts of the 19th Battalion Combat Team. Notable items within the collection are the Colt 1911 pistol owned by the late Brigadier General Florencio F. Magsino. The fourth panel provides an overview of the 5 major battles in the Korean War in which PEFTOK was engaged on against the North Korean People's Army and the Chinese Communist Forces. The Battle of Myeongdong, 11 of November 1950, 10th BCT. The first engagement began with the Battle of Myeongdong on 11th November 1950, the first battle victory on foreign soil by the Filipinos. 2 battalions of the North Korean People's Army engaged the 2 companies of the PEFTOK 10th BCT. The village of Myeongdong was secured with about a number of Filipino wounded and 1 damaged truck. North Korean losses were 42 killed in action and 100 wounded. The Battle of Yuldong, 22 to 23rd of April 1951, 10th BCT. Etched in the annals of Philippine military history is the Battle of Yuldong, which saw the 900 men of 10th BCT withstand a massive night attack by the 12th Chinese Army. A tactical and strategic victory for the Filipinos and the UN command as the Chinese advance was halted by the Filipinos and their dreams of recapturing the capital of Seoul was shattered. The Battle of Yuldong cost the 10th BCT 15 killed, 26 wounded, and 14 men missing in action. Chinese dead are estimated in the hundreds and littered the battalion's positions. The Filipinos emerged from the third great battle still undefeated. At Yuldong, the 10th BCT earned the nickname the Fighting Filipinos. The Battle for Hill Erie, April to May 1952, 20th BCT. Hill Erie, known as Outpost Erie, was an infamous hill 10 miles west of Chorwon. Although only 120 feet high, the strategically placed hill commanded the terrain in its vicinity as it stood a mile north of the UNC's main line of resistance and a mile and a half south of the Communist outpost line. The Chinese Communist forces in March 1952 dislodged the Allied unit defending the hill. Since the hill was difficult to defend, the 20th PCT denied it to the Chinese by a constant series of counterattacks. Hill Erie was stormed and captured on the 21st of May 1952 by a reconnaissance platoon under 2nd Lieutenant Fidel Valdez Ramos. The 20th PCT attacked Hill Erie 9 times, with the Chinese losing more than 160 Chinese soldiers. The hill was vital to the subsequent battles involving the 19th PCT. The battle for Combat Outpost 8 and Hill 191, 17th to 21st of June 1952, 19th PCT. Hill 191, Hill Erie, and the T-Bone Hill were considered the most vulnerable sector of the United Nations Command main line of resistance. Hill 191 or Arsenal Hill and Hill Erie, together called Combat Outpost Number 8, were defended by the 19th PCT in June when the Communist Chinese launched a 5-day battle to regain the strategic hills. One of the longest exchange of artillery fire between the Filipinos and Chinese began on June 17 that took 4 more days as the Chinese Communist forces launched a massive attack on the evening of 20th of June. Flares fired by the 19th revealed waves of Chinese surging towards Hill Erie and 191. Under an artillery barrage, the Filipino battalion stood its ground. A savage hand-to-hand combat ensued between the two forces, though in the end the Chinese fall back as was forced to retreat by the Filipino counterattack. The retreating Chinese left behind over 500 dead and 2 T-34-85 battle tanks destroyed by the Filipino troopers. 8 of the 19th PCT troopers gave the ultimate sacrifice, while 16 were wounded in one of the savage engagements between the Filipinos and the Chinese. Hill 191 was the Iwo Jima of the Philippines, as 3 Filipino soldiers planted the Philippine flag at the top of Hill 191. The Battle of Christmas Hill, June to July 1953, 14th BC. The Battle for Christmas Hill, or Hill 1040, began on 14th of June 1953. This series of engagement would culminate 2 days before the armistice was signed on July 27, 1953. Considered as one of the bloodiest battles as Filipino artillery rained down on the Chinese positions, more than 200 Chinese soldiers lost their lives in the last battle between the Filipinos and Chinese during the Korean War. The 14th PCT lost 5 killed in action, while 54 wounded in action in its stint during the Korean campaign. The last panel provides an overview of the pivotal role of the Philippine Air Force Transport and Reconnaissance and the embedded Philippine Air Force units within each of the PCT, as well as the combat service support and escort operations of the Philippine Navy. As a final tribute, the panel also shows the various monuments within and outside of the Philippines in memory of PEFTOK, such as the Filipino-Korean Soldier Monument in Rizal Park, Manila, the PEFTOK Obelisk in the PMA grounds in Baguio City, the Korean War Pylon at the Libingan ng Mga Bayani, Taguig City, the Marie Korea Monument in Marikina City, and the large monument to the Philippine Armed Forces participation in Goyang City, Republic of Korea. The last portion of this virtual tour will cover the uniforms and weapons utilized by our troops during the conflict. These weapons and uniforms were similarly worn by our UN allies. These items, as you will see, are much more older than us, and on the first cabinet, You might be surprised of the condition of the 1951 winter parka issued by the United States Army to then Lieutenant Guillermo Pecache of the 14th PCT, who would later retire as a brigadier general. The two other items are the duffel bag and knapsack of our Battle of Yuldong hero, Captain Conrado Yap. The weapons cabinet represents the weapon of both sides, with the Filipinos using the US-made M3 grease gun, M1 carbine, and Thompson submachine gun, while those used by the North Koreans and the Chinese are the Soviet-made PPS-43 submachine gun, the Mosin Nagant sniper rifle, and the PPSH-41 submachine gun. The last display case shows the summer and gala uniforms worn by the PEFTOK troops at that time. The uniforms featured here were donated by the family of the late Lieutenant Atutubo of the 19th PCT and Lieutenant Bartolome Catolos of the 2nd PCT. Lastly, the infantry support weapons fielded by our troops during the war, the 60mm and the 81mm mortar, which is very different on the mortar of today, the recoilless rifle of Super Bazooka, which was very useful in attacking heavily secluded areas and armor. A small item but very important one is the white phosphorus box holder, whose WP shells would be of paramount help to our troops in illuminating the enemy at night. Above these weapons, you could see the framed medals and photograph of the late General Tomas Batilo, who was one of the two officers that became prisoners of war and endured torture in the hands of the communist forces. He was freed along with other Filipino prisoners of war in August 1953. Thank you for accompanying us in this virtual tour and hopefully imparted with you the gallant story of the Philippine Expeditionary Force to Korea. We hope to see you soon. Thank you and good day.
Indeed, the magnificent PEFTOK Korean War Memorial Hall Museum symbolizes the undying friendship between the Philippines and Korea, and it has been serving as the hallowed place for the memorialization of the PEFTOK soldiers' history and intrepidity. Now, we would like to thank our viewers from Las Piñas National High School and the descendants of the PEFTOK veterans watching with us today. So now, before we begin, let me introduce today's guest speaker. He is the museum curator at the PEFTOK Korean War Memorial Hall Museum under the Department of National Defense, Philippine Veterans Affairs Office since 2011. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree in architecture at the Palawan State University. In 1997, he completed the Basic Naval Reserve Officers Training Course in the Philippine Navy and is with Bravo class of 1999 of the Philippine Coast Guard Auxiliary Officers Indoctrination Course. He is also a 2002 graduate of the Aerospace Power Course at the Air University, Alabama, USA. In 2008, he took the Military History Operations course and the Joint Intelligence course in 2015 at the U.S. Defense Technical Information Center. He is with Class 26-2018 of the Executive Course on National Security at the National Defense College of the Philippines. In 2007, he was Research Officer at the Office of the Naval Historian and Project Officer at the Maritime Historical Branch of the Fleet Marine Warfare Center. He has conducted lectures about the Philippine participation in the Korean War at the University of the Philippines Manila Social Science Department, Ateneo de Manila University, 2019 and 2021 PAF Historical Conference, as well as with the Philippine Navy's first Historical Family Conference last May 2021. He has also lectured with the Coastal Defense Regiment of the Philippine Marine Corps on coastal defense operation last August 2020. His articles have been published in the official military and naval journals in 6 countries, namely Australia, Canada, Estonia, Singapore, the United States, and the Philippines. Let's give a big round of applause for our speaker today, Commander Mark R. Condeno.
Good afternoon, Professor Mia and Ma'am Pam
Good
Hakar. So
afternoon,
this
Sir
is
Mark.
again a long time. We've been in touch with UPKRC since 2012. I've worked with Ma'am Mia since starting those years. The last time we were together was in UP Manila. So I conducted a lecture there as well in Ateneo. Uh, this will be a good one since you've mentioned that we just commemorated the 73 years of establishing of diplomatic ties between the Philippines and Korea. So exactly 73 yesterday, 03 March 1949. And we will be commemorating the 72nd anniversary of the Korean War a few months from now on June 25, 1950. So yes, it's an honor and opportunity to share with most of our viewers right now. Some of the PEFTOK veteran members, family descendants are here. So if it's all right, I'll just mention Ma'am Renata Fadriquela of the 19th Battalion Combat Team, Ma'am Melinda Ranches, also of the 19th Battalion Combat Team. And of course, our viewers from the Las Piñas National High School. So a lot of them are listening or viewing right now. So Miss Satrina Rodriguez, Miss Rensel Makasinag, Miss Casey Angela. So some of those students. So I guess we could start with the lecture presentation. Okay. So I'll brief the table of contents. So we'll do a recap of the Korean War, how it began, and then the early Philippines-Korea military relations. So these two covers the early. These are the recorded military relations between the Philippines and Korea. So first one is the naval mission to Chinhae in 1947, and the second one was a month after the war when the Philippines deployed the 17 Sherman tanks and one Hellcat tank destroyer to Busan. So before the arrival of the PEFTOK. So another chapter will be discussing the Philippine Expeditionary Force to Korea, PEFTOK, and of course the corresponding battalion combat teams. I've mentioned that, or one of the main titles is joint operations. So when we think about the Korean War, it comes readily right away that it is a boots on the ground operation. But this is not the things that came to be, as the Philippine Navy and the Philippine Air Force was also heavily involved in providing support to the Philippine battalion. So that would be the two and three last parts of the lecture. And of course, lastly, the lessons learned and the post-war Korean military relations. Next slide, please. Yes. So Korean War, almost exactly 73 years by June this year, began on a Sunday, June 25, 1950. So North Korean Army made an attack against the Republic of Korea by crossing the 38th parallel. So it's a surprise attack, as what we have said earlier on the video. It's considered a surprise attack as they didn't call the political administration of the South Korean government at that time. So in the rule of warfare, you have to call your attacking nation, the nation that you're going to attack or invade, for them to know that you have already declared war. So 16 nations provided air, ground, and naval units, which you would see later on the order of battle on the latter part of the presentation. So 5 nations also provided medical support, and the rest provided economic and financial assistance. You would see the actual photograph of the invasion. So those are North Korean T-34-85 tanks. So exactly at 7 o'clock in the morning. Next slide, please. So the Philippines response. President Elpidio Quirino announced to the Philippine nation on August 7, 1950, that the Filipino soldiers would be deployed to Korea, while the Philippine Congress and Senate on the enacted Republic Act 573, or the Philippine Military Aid to the United Nations Act. So after signing the RA 573, soldiers of the 10th Battalion Combat Team boarded a U.S. naval transport ship after a 4-day voyage, it arrived at Busan on 19 September 1950. So, and lastly, of course, it is the first AFP joint overseas operation, as it includes the Philippine Army, which is did most of the fighting. The bulk of the battalion is composed of Army personnel and some constabulary personnel. Then the Air Force has also elements on the BCT as well as the Navy. Next slide, please. United Nations call for action. I hope you could see clearly the order of battle. The Philippines was the first country from Southeast Asia to deploy, and the third one from the UN. So we are the sixth largest UN force to deploy in Korea. So by June 27, 1950, UN Security Council acted Resolution 83, which recommended UN members to provide military assistance to the Republic of Korea. Next slide, please. So the beginnings, as I have said earlier, this is the first notable military relations exchange between the Philippines and the young Korean Republic. So in August 1947, the United States Navy tasked the Filipino Navy, then still known as the Offshore Patrol. So they tasked one of a World War II veteran, then Lieutenant Ramon Alcaraz, to ferry 7 or 8 minesweepers for the young Korean Navy. So the Filipinos somehow became a part in the development of the young Republic of Korean Navy, then known as the Korean Naval Defense Corps. So next slide, please. So these are the officers that were part of the ferry mission or the minesweeper task group to Chinhae. Not just Chinhae, but they also went to Busan and the other Korean naval bases. So the lead group or the leader of the task group is Lieutenant Ramon Alcaraz, then Ensign Lubigildo Gantioki, Ensign Marcelino Kalinawan, Ensign Vasquez, bottom is Ensign Dioscoro Papa, Ensign Antonio Kalingo, Ensign Federico Martir, and Ensign Gojardo Nonato. So most of them became flag rank officers, and some reached the rank of captain. Another military relations was as early as July 1950. So before the deployment of the PEFTOK, the Philippines deployed 17 M4A1 Sherman tanks and 1 M18 Hellcat tank destroyer. So the Shermans on the Puto are the actual tanks that we sent to Korea. So the other one, which also shows the M18 Hellcat, that is Captain Conrado Yap on board, as part of the mission to augment Allied armor during the opening days of the war. Below is President Quirino with then Second Lieutenant Francisco Estamondong. So he is the one who was tasked to bring the tanks to Korea. Next slide, please. Yes, the Philippine Expeditionary Force to Korea, PEFTOK. So the 10th, those are the logos of the battalion combat teams, the 10th, the 20th, the 19th, the 14th Battalion, and the 2nd Battalion Combat Team. So the Battalion Combat Team is basically known as an AFP battalion. So it is quite different from the battalion combat teams that were left behind in the Philippines during the Korean War. So the difference is that the Korean War BCTs has Air Force and naval elements on it, as well as Red Cross. Next slide, please. So the battalion commanders from Colonel Mariano Asurin and Colonel Ojeda of the 10th Battalion Combat Team. The 10th is the first battalion to be sent to Korea. So most of the BCTs were in Korea for almost a year of tour of duty. The next one is Colonel Salvador Abcede, battalion commander of the 20th BCT, in which former President Fidel Ramos belongs, who is also known as the hero of the Battle for Hill Eri. Next one is Colonel Ramon Aguirre of the 19th Battalion Combat Team, Colonel Nicanor Jimenez of the 14th Battalion, the Avengers, and lastly, Colonel Reynaldo Mendoza and Colonel Antonio de Vera of the 2nd Battalion Combat Team. The 2nd Battalion Combat Team arrived after the Korean War. they focus more on peace building and peacekeeping of the Republic of Korea. Next slide, please. The major battles of the PEFTOK. The 10th BCT has 3 major battles. So the Battle of Myeongdong on 11 November 1950, the Battle of Nakdedong 11 April 1951, and the Battle of Yuldong also in 22-23 April 1951. So Nakdedong was the curtain raiser for the Battle of Yuldong. So why Yuldong? And of course, I know you're very familiar with the Battle of Yuldong. It's a great stand by the Filipino forces. It was a game changer at that time. Despite the large troop enemy concentrations, we were able to hold Yuldong as to save Seoul. So if the Filipinos didn't make a stand on Yuldong, definitely Seoul will fall to the communist hands. So Battle for Hill Eri for the 20th BCT. So this operation was led by President Fidel Ramos. He was a first lieutenant at that time. The 19th Battalion Combat Team, Battle of Combat Outpost number 8, which was also in 1952. The Battle for Christmas Hill. So Christmas Hill was the last engagement between the Filipinos and the Chinese forces. This was from June to July 1953, just almost a few days after the, before the armistice. So this is one of the pivotal battles during the last years of the war. And lastly, the peacekeeping and peace-building missions conducted by the 2nd Battalion Combat Team. So the second, or the Black Lions as they are known, was the first AFP Battalion Combat Team to be trained on nuclear, chemical, biological warfare. So because Korea at that time was already on an atomic warfare era. Next slide, please. Escort mission. So this is one of the missions conducted by the Philippine Navy. We have about 16 submarine chasers at that time, with the submarine chaser based in Corregidor Island. So during the deployment of the 10th, 2 of our submarine chasers always escorts every U.S. Navy vessel or Philippine Navy LST from its transit from the port of Manila up to the outskirts of the South China Sea, and after which they will be met by 2 U.S. Navy destroyers who will escort them up to the port of Busan. So this is our actual photos of the deployment. On the left side is the submarine chaser Negros Oriental. So, and the other one is the transport vessel for the 10th Battalion Combat Team, the USNS Sylvester Antalac. Next slide, please. So combat service support. So the ferrying missions, as noted in military parlance, we call it the combat service support. So these are some of the LSTs. At that time, the Philippine Navy only have about 5 landing ship tanks, and most or all of them were utilized during the Korean War. So except during the last time, the 2nd BCT was mostly transported by United States Navy vessels. Next slide, please. So some of the names of the skippers. So on the photograph is Lieutenant Florentino Benaventura. He was the skipper of one of the LSTs, LST 75, that ferried home the 10th Battalion Combat Team. Next slide, please. So another branch of service, the Philippine Air Force in the Korean War. Next slide, please. So the PAP's primary mission, so reconnaissance, forward air control, transport and supply, casualty, medical, and POW evacuation. Next, please. So those are the 4 photographs that shows the role of the Air Force. Actually, the upper left part shows the son-in-law of President Quirino, First Lieutenant Luis Tito Gonzalez, who was a reconnaissance pilot assigned with the 19th and later with the 14th Battalion Combat Team. Next one is the forward or air control. Yeah. Okay. And then the POW evacuation. Okay, this is one of the Filipino aircraft, the C-47. So this is an actual photograph provided to us by the United States Air Force Museum. So this shows C-47 number 2100925 at Kimpo Air Base, K-14. This is also the same aircraft that crashed in Cebu, in Mount Manonggal, carrying President Ramon Magsaysay. So mostly our C-47s were deployed in Manila and Seoul and Tokyo. Then another aircraft used by the Filipino pilots was the Stinson L-5 Sentinel and the Ryan L-17 Navion. The last aircraft was utilized by the Air Force element of the 2nd Battalion Combat Team. So of course, you see there Lieutenant Gonzalez. So another aircraft that was utilized was the Douglas B-26 Invader. This one was flown by Lieutenant Adelio Cruz. He was attached with the 19th Battalion Combat Team and part of the 17th Bombardment Wing. Was flying as co-pilot and attacked North Korean positions, mostly supply dumps and depot. Next slide, please. So another notable unit that the Philippine Air Force deployed was the POP Air-to-Ground Liaison Team, known as the ATGLT. Its modern-day equivalent is the Forward Air Control. So it was led by then Lieutenant Josefino Firmalino Pareñas, along with his two men, Technical Sergeant Carlos Toralba and Staff Sergeant Dominador Jimenez. On the left photograph, you would see on the first man on the row is Staff Sergeant Jimenez. He was captured in 1951 and was only freed in 1953 during Operation Big Switch, the only Air Force man to be captured at that time. So he is a communications and radio specialist. Next slide, please. As we mentioned earlier, so the president deployed his son, a signal communications specialist of the Philippine Army, a graduate of the Advanced Infantry Officers Course in Fort Benning, the United States, First Lieutenant Tomas Hiquilla Quirino. He was with the president's son-in-law, First Lieutenant Luis Chito Gonzalez, who is a pilot. And on the latter picture is First Lieutenant Antonio Ruig, also an Air Force pilot. On the upper right picture is one of the officers among them is then First Lieutenant Ernesto Bueno, later General Ernesto Bueno. Next slide, please. So lessons learned for we discussed about this about the Philippine Army. So the field prowess of the Filipino infantry and the field artillery batteries. So the Filipinos has a high rate of fire. So we are known in Korea as a machine gun artillery. So that during their deployment, the Allied forces noticed our adeptness on those weapons and equipment, and in future that we would be put emphasis on the artillery and infantry combination. Next is the implementation of tanks or the utilization of tanks by the Filipino forces. During the Korean War, we deployed medium and light tanks such as the Sherman and the Chaffee. It was recommended that a more heavier tank could be provided to the Filipinos to increase further firepower support for the Filipino troops. Next slide, please. So for the Philippine Air Force, lessons learned for the Philippine Air Force during the Korean War was we were supposed to deploy a squadron of Mustang fighters. These are propeller fighters of their day at that time, which is most utilized by most Southeast Asian Air Forces and European Air Forces. So, but sadly, we still only have around 40 to 60 during the Korean War, and this did not push through. The training of Filipino pilots for jet operations. In fact, just after 1 year after the cessation of hostilities, in 1955, first jet aircraft during the time of President Ramon Magsaysay, 5 Lockheed T-33 jet trainers joined the Philippine Air Force, making the Philippines into the jet age. So next one is the training of Filipino aerial observers in coordination with the other Allied Air Forces. So 5 air medals were received by Filipino pilots, one of which is Lieutenant Gonzalez, while Colonel Ebuen. Colonel Ebuen was the commanding general of the Philippine Air Force during the time of the Korean War, and he was one of the earlier Filipino pilots to conduct a reconnaissance over the demilitarized zone, or the 38 parallel. Next slide, please. So for the Philippine Navy Combat Service Support, so one of the lessons learned is prepositioning of spare parts and materials in key areas within the country. There has been some problems encountered during their deployment, and materials has to came from Manila. So I think prepositioning the needed parts, ship parts in several bases in the country could be a particular value. And then, of course, several suggested for the high seas duties of the the major ships of the Philippine Navy with the US 7th Fleet at that time. Next, please. Okay, post-Korean War military relations. This begins from 1953 to present. So this is the first Korean Navy vessel to visit the Philippines in 1953. So it is a Tacoma-class frigate of the Republic of Korea Navy. So they came here for a 3-day visit. Next slide, please. And then these are 2 destroyers, actually American destroyers, that were transferred to the Republic of Korea Navy and later on transferred to the Philippine Navy. So sadly, we didn't put these ships into commission, but used them as spare parts source for the 3 cannon class that we already have in service with, at that time. Next slide. Okay, these are the ships. I think this was donated around the 90s. So these are the original Conrado Yap class. So about, say, 8 of the Conrado Yap and 10 of the Tomas Batilo class. All of these ships are named after PEFTOK Korean War heroes by executive order from President Fidel Ramos. So those are the 2 ships above. So below one is the Mulgay class LCU, recently donated in 2013, and the Conrado Yap class. So the second Korean ship to bear the name Conrado Yap. So currently in service with the Philippine Navy. Next slide, please. Next slide, ma'am. Okay, here we go. So these are another robust strength of since there's our technicalities. Okay. Next slide, ma'am. Yes. Thank you. That's so these are another set of military equipment donations to the Philippines. So these are, if you're familiar with the Northrop F5, which was already flown by the Philippine Air Force during the early 60s. Sometime in early 2000, we received additional 8 ex-former Korean Air Force F5 Freedom Fighters. By 2008, another 9 aircraft or trainer aircraft, P-41, were provided to the Philippine Air Force Flying School. Next slide. Then to the present day. So these are weapons procurement of the Philippine government, of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, of Korean military equipment. So first one, of course, is the FA Fighting Eagle for the Philippine Air Force. So 12 units were procured. The 2 vessels, frontline vessels of the Philippine Navy as of the present, BRP Jose Rizal and BRP Antonio Luna. So guided missile frigates. also built by HHI of Korea. The Kia M250 truck being used by both the Philippine Army and the Philippine Marine Corps. The Kia KM450 light truck of the Army and also of the Marines, and soon to be the Kuryong multiple launch rocket system of both the Army and the Marine Corps. So all Korean-made weapons. Next slide, ma'am. Lastly, and of course, this is one of the important aspects on our Korean and Philippine military relations. It's the exchange in students of Filipino cadets at the Rock Air Force Academy. So there are 3 Filipino cadets yearly, although I think I was just informed that it has stopped during the pandemic. Also 3 to 4 student officers each year at their Command in General Staff College. Maritime drills between the Philippine Navy and the Republic of Korea Navy. Staff talks between the Korean Army and Philippine Army, and of course the other branch of services. And intelligence exchange between the armed forces and the ROC Armed Forces and the Philippine Air Force. So those photos shows the maritime drills, which was held at Manila Bay last April 2021. And Lieutenant Canon John Aguilar from the province of Capiz, a graduate of the Republic of Korea Air Force Academy in 2017. So, next slide, please, ma'am. Okay, that ends the presentation. I hope they have gained some insights on how the Philippines was part of the Korean War, the Philippine participation of the Korean War, and the respective branches' contribution on the Korean conflict. So, looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Sir Mark Condeno, for the very informative session today and the very beautiful virtual tour at the PKWMH Museum located at Bayani Road, Taguig City. Truly, no one shall be left behind. The heroism and gallantry of the PEFTOK veterans exude the world-class level of Philippine soldiery for their love of democracy and world peace. Now, the session is open for questions and comments. You may send them through the Facebook or YouTube live chat box. If possible, please introduce yourself with your affiliation when raising your questions. I will be reading a few questions that have been collected throughout the session. Do you have any questions ba from the audience? So far, sir, wala pong mga question na nakikita dito
No
sa Facebook
questions,
and
I think.
YouTube,
None.
but I have a prepared question, Sir Mark.
Sure.
My
Raymond.
question po is, paano po yung naging recruitment or yung joining doon sa selection ng mga pupunta sa Korea, no, to fight as PEFTOK? Ano po yung mga naging qualifications, yung screening, and ano po yung kontrata to join po?
I think that it's a very it was announced that a unit will be sent, lalo na sa 10. It was announced that Filipino soldiers will be deployed sa Korea, and there are more basic sa former World War II veterans. So isa 'yon sa naging And then of course voluntary. Right from the start voluntary talaga. Hindi sila nagkaroon ng pilitan. So yung mga gustong sumama, even the newly ones, I think sinama sila. A more detailed on the screening, on the salary, whatever, is on the Philippine Military Aid Act. Andun yun. So it's a medyo mahaba. So pero more on the basis andoon, even the pay scale andoon din. But even the reserve officers were also part of it. So kasi may kontra, that's what I remember, no? May kontrata na if you're a reserve officer and then you join PEFTOK, mostly pagbalik mo you'll be a regular officer na. So you'll be on active duty status. I think yun yung isa sa mga naging guidelines, I think. I remember.
Thank you so much for that, Sir Mark. So let's see if we still
Thank you,
have
Mon.
questions from the audience.
Okay.
So far po, wala pong mga questions from...
I see one more, no? I see one
But I
from
still
Miss
have
Julie.
one third question, Sir Mark po.
Yeah,
Ito po
Julie.
is, how crucial naman po or important yung role ng PEFTOK soldiers sa mga battles na naipanalo nila during the Korean War, tulad na lamang po ng Battle of Yulong?
Okay, so that is a good question. Very familiar because, of course, you're a grandchild of a veteran. And Yuldong, so we discussed Yuldong. Yuldong is very important in the role of the Filipino soldier. Most of the UN forces at that time were recalled back to Seoul. The Puerto Ricans, I think, were penetrated by the Chinese. Their positions as far as the reserve were also captured by the Chinese. And then the Turks, their field artillery battery was also captured by the Chinese. It was only the Filipinos that remained on the Yuldong line. So of the 6 countries, I think only us remained on that time. So it was one of the sabihin natin, it was the decision of Christ na andoon tayo na iwan. One story was that we didn't receive the communications. We didn't receive the radio call from the main UN command headquarters in Seoul, and they told all the UN forces to fall back because of the large Chinese penetration of UN line. So that particular information, as told by the veterans, was that they didn't receive that, and Colonel Ojeda decided to hold Yuldong at all costs. So that make it an historical aspect. If the Filipinos weren't at Yuldong, if we didn't stop the Chinese at Yuldong, so Seoul would fall. So if one could get the picture, I think most of it may pinablish kami sa Facebook page ng Memorial Hall. There is the Battle of Yuldong showing the Filipino tent. So andun siya, makikita nyo, if ever the Filipinos were defeated on that particular area, the road to Seoul was open. So if we didn't take the stand of the ultimate sacrifice made by Captain Yap, Lieutenant Artiaga, and 14 other Filipino soldiers, Seoul would be again on communist hands. So that's one particular aspect of Yuldong na naging game changer yung Filipino soldiers, naging game changer yung PEFTOK against a larger enemy. We were just about 900 eh. So from 1,303 ang 10th BCT at the time of Yuldong, they are only 900. So they are facing a Chinese army from roughly 12,000 to 40,000 men. So at all sides yun. And yun yung naging particular effect of the decision of Colonel Ojeda.
So much, Sir Mark. And now we have a question naman po from our audience, from Julin Dasha Manakmul. Good afternoon po. How could our country show our support in maintaining democratic values nowadays? In relation with the PEFTOK veterans po siguro.
Yeah, siguro I think the Philippines is not we are not hawks eh. We are also peace-loving people. So, but of course, kapag nasa tama naman tayo, talagang pinaglalaban natin. But every UN agenda, UN with regards to peace, maintaining peace, sinusuportahan natin yon. What we call in the armed forces yung peacekeeping operations, peace building, we have deployed since the 50s, of course, beginning with Korea, and then later on with Liberia, in the Golan Heights, other parts of Africa, andoon tayo. Haiti, we were in Haiti around 1999-2000. So that's the part of how we support in maintaining democratic values. So we maintain the law and the rule of order of a particular nation. So I hope I have answered Miss Julian's question.
So much, Sir Mark. Ayan, yung second question naman po natin. Good afternoon po. What is the best position of South Korea and the Philippines now that we are confronting war which is happening in Ukraine. So, Sir Mark, we see nga na history repeats itself and it feels like it's the Korean War again in the
Yes.
position of Ukraine. So, yun po yung question
Yeah.
niya. Ano po yung position ng Philippines and South Korea in
Okay,
confronting
actually, from my point of view, from my point of view as a historian, as a curator, we have already supported the UN on calling to the stop or the aggression of Russia or the invasion of Ukraine. So I think yun ang best position as of now to call for Russia to stop or to disengage the forces in Ukraine. That would be the best, not just for the Philippines or not just for South Korea. If you would see, it has already affected the economy. The gas has already, or oil prices has already taken a toll, and other economic goods. Of course, peace and security, especially those countries in Europe has nuclear weapons, and the nuclear facility, if you were reading earlier just this afternoon, this morning, although it's secured now, so countries are trying to call on Russia to stop attacking that particular nuclear facility that if ever a loose missile strike or a loose weapon could turn into a nuclear disaster that could affect not just Europe later on, maybe the whole Asia Pacific.
Thank you so much, Sir Mark, for the answer. Meron pa po tayong isang question, I believe, from, do we still have an... Yan po. Yung third question po natin is from Jezreel Rosete. Good afternoon po. I'm Jezreel F. Rosete from Las Piñas National High School, Maine. My question po is, how could our country show our support in maintaining democratic values nowadays without resorting into aggression? Yun naman po, Sir Mark, no? Same naman po, but without aggression naman daw po.
Okay. So without resorting into aggression, so maintaining the Philippines, I think, that's what I said earlier, yung sa peacekeeping. So it's one of our strengths. The UN has always requested us to provide peacekeeping forces in various conflicts, as I have mentioned earlier. Lagi tayong tinatawagan. They know the Filipino people are peaceful people. So hindi lang naman pagdating ng mga sundalo natin doon is we just patrol, we just conduct. No, our soldiers, our peacekeepers engage in developing the nations kung asan sila. Say we are in Haiti, we are in Somalia, we are in the Golan Heights or in West Africa. Hindi lang sila nagpapatrol. It's not just patrol. We conduct what you call CMO, civil military operations. So that's one way of maintaining democratic values of the Filipino way, and of also sharing how we practice it, and then at least may tuturo natin doon sa mga citizens ng ibang bansa, apart from resorting to aggression doon sa kanila, kasi mostly sa kanila pag nagkaroon ng konting gulo is talagang ano na. But for us, mini-maintain talaga natin yung peace. Tayo naman, very peaceful tayo. How many revolutions? I mean, of course, the EDSA revolution was one. But of course, those are the primary tools of the Filipino soldier to maintain peace. So, yun po. Yun yung how we maintain our democratic values and how we also share it with the other nations.
Thank you so much, Sir Mark, for that. Yun nabanggit nyo nga po, no? Yung CMO. Ito naman po from Prof. Kyung Min Bay. As a military officer, what do you think is necessary to pursue mutual defense partnerships between Philippines and Korea?
Thank you, Ma'am Mia, Professor Bay. Thank you for this question. But I guess this is above my pay grade. But I'll share my opinion. I'll share my idea. I think having a mutual defense treaty, of course, with South Korea would be a very good one. So I looked through it on the technological side. some of primary weapons of the AFP is already Korean. And then the exercises, actually we were doing it na, the military drills between the ROC Navy and the Philippine Navy, which started a few years, or just last year, I think that was just last year. So it started with a passage exercise and some visit and board exercises. So I think this would be a good one from of course, from my point of view. Um, it will further strengthen our country's relations, which of course is started by PEFTOK. So I think that would be the foundations of that future mutual defense. So from a this is just from within, not of course the more broad concept of a more broad mutual defense treaty with South Korea.
Thank you so much, Sir Mark, for that. Yung next question naman po natin is from Carrot Duel 127. Now that the world is facing another threat of war, due which is seen in Ukraine, what do you think should be the best position of the Philippines in this issue?
Okay, Miss Carrot Bill, thank you for this question. As I have, I think the same answer earlier. The Philippines would be in its best position of staying on the neutral side. But of course, they have already filed condemning the Russian aggression. So it's not just, even though we are too far from Ukraine and Russia, it has already affected the Philippine economy. So best to remain neutral, but call for an end or stop of the conflict, disengage of forces.
Next naman po, question from Feria Desni Timbang. Good afternoon po from Las Piñas National High School. How can we maintain peace with South Korea in a modern world we live in today?
Okay. Ms. Timbang, thank you for this wonderful question. From a Filipino point of view, we could maintain peace in South Korea. Of course, they are still at the stage of war right now kasi it's an armistice. Technically, North and South are still at war, and then some skirmishes still happen. Maintaining peace is, what do you call, vigilant. The ROC armed forces should be vigilant, and as well as not just their military forces, military leaders, but of course the political administrations of both countries. That's the only way that we could maintain peace in the Korean Peninsula. So if you would remember, the People's Democratic Republic of Korea or North Korea has nuclear weapons. So it's a very volatile region, volatile security. So maintaining peace, and then of course proper thinking within the political and military sides of both countries. So that's the only way we could maintain peace in this modern era.
Thank you, Sir Mark, for that. And may isa pa po tayong question from Morsid Kusain. Hi, Commander Mark Condeno. I'm Morsid from UP Diliman. I just want to get your opinion on why does the Korean War very notorious as the Forgotten War? Thanks. Yan po yung...
Thank you, Sir Morsid. Thank you for this question. It's not just you na nagme-mention yan, na Forgotten War. Kasi Korea, in fact, or the Korean War is just 3 years. So, but as of now, continuous pa rin dahil both North and South are still at the armistice. Technically, they are still at war. Na-shadow sila ng other conflicts at that time. So, 1953, after that, sumunod is yung Vietnam War originally started 54. The French, nagkaroon yan eh. The first Indochina War, and then the second Indochina War, yung what is known as the Vietnam War, na involved na yung Americans and of course us as part of the pre-world forces at that time. Yun, medyo na overshadow yung Korea. And then the other skirmishes at the time, 1962, yung Cuban Missile Crisis. So kaya medyo nakalimutan. na out of the ano siya, yung Korean War. So that's why they call it Forgotten War. So that's one of the reasons natabunan siya ng other world events. Thank you.
So much. Do we still have questions? Ayan, meron pa po, Sir Mark, from Andrea Marie Tapis. Ayan. Good afternoon po. If Ukraine fall from Russia, is there a tendency that North Korea will commit the same aggression against South Korea?
Okay, thank you, Miss Andrea. Thank you for this for your question. So I think medyo this question is for diplomats. These are for diplomats na to. But again, ang tendency is I don't see North Korea will commit the same aggression in South Korea. Kung isasabay natin if Ukraine falls from Russia, South Korea has a treaty with the United States. So Ukraine right now is not a member pa ng NATO. That is why NATO could not directly support them. They were just recently accepted at the European Union. So yun, North Korea will think twice in conducting aggression sa South Korea. So they will have the condemnation of the world if ever they do it again. So unless, of course, it's a massive worldwide conspiracy na Russia, North Korea like that. So it's just my opinion, It's just my opinion. But yun, as of the moment, I do not see North Korea conducting an invasion or an invasion of South Korea in coordination with what Russia is doing in Ukraine. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sir Mark. We still have last two questions po for our open forum. And one of those is from Raimi Evangelista. Good afternoon, Commander Condeno. Do we have similar geopolitical issues with ROK that can allow us to engage in bilateral exercises with AFP's Korean counterparts? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I have mentioned it on the presentation earlier. So right now, I think we are on the level ng not a massive exercise that we conduct with the Americans. There is a cooperation agreement. I'm not just familiar with it. Pero yun nga, as of now, we are under an umbrella na both branch of services are conducting staff-to-staff talks. So from the Air Force as well as the Korean Air Force, and then the Navy, the Marines, and intelligence exchange. So yun yung level natin as of now. But any massive exercises, I am not privy at pa or kung meron. So yun, siguro another set of talks to discuss that for a more bigger participation. Pero tayo kasi nagsisend tayo ng mga observers sa exercises. If you're familiar with the military exercises ng focus lens, team spirit. So team spirit dates back to 1980s. So I believe we sent observers there. Sa Korea. And of course, I think some Korean officers were also present here during some of the military exercises that we have. As observers, of course.
Thank you so much, Sir Mark. And now for our last question po from Booker. Good afternoon po. My name is Elio. Why is there no permanent peace treaty that has ever been signed after the Korean War po?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Miss Elio. This is one of the boggling questions right now kasi talagang we have South and North has different communism, and then South is of course democracy. They have their agendas. So I think North wants a reunification or more on their side na on a peace treaty, and of course the South doesn't agree also. Much more better siguro this would be conducted by the UN if a permanent peace treaty. So siya naman kasi yung political body na or government body na pwede mag-handle within this particular engagements na hindi magiging what do you call? Hindi talo yung South and ganun din sa North. So they would both met their objectives. walang lamangan sa dalawang countries.
And that's our last question for today. Thank you, Sir Mark, for that. And before we end, Sir Mark, do you have any comments or any messages you still want to say to our
Yeah.
viewers?
Thank you, Mon. Again, thank you for the opportunity to the University of the Philippines Korea Research Center. I think kay Prof. Mia, Prof. Kyung Min, of course, Ma'am Pam, Mon. This is the second or third time I think I was involved with UP. So it's been a long time. Last time was 2015 when I conducted a lecture at UP Manila. And then some of the UP students and faculty visited the PEFTOK Korean War Memorial Hall. So hopefully we could further engage in this kind of talks and dialogues more on the military history. Kulang pa ang data rin namin. Very few pa ang if we could get the Air Force's story is already almost complete. Yung Navy konti na rin lang. And so a little bit lang kung may ma-share pa ang UPKRC with us and also with ang PEFTOK Korean War Memorial with the UPKRC. So it would be a great endeavor between our two organizations. And yun, I would take the opportunity to invite our viewers sa PBAO to watch and listen to the Kagitingan series. Mon, you're very familiar with that. So it's already started last March 1 and we are covering World War II topics ng Philippines. So it's one of the propagation of the heroic deeds of our World War II heroes in this year's commemoration of so I am inviting all the viewers, of course, even the UPKRC staff, anyone who feels like in the world of history. Thank you, Mon. Thank you for the opportunity to Mamiya, of course.
Thank you so much, Sir Mark. And also, I may just add kung open na po ba ang ating PKWMH for the visitors sa ating mga viewers if they can visit now yung ating museum in Taguig.
Yes, Mon. We're open now, ano? We're open now. In fact, since alert level 3, we're open yata. We just accepted, sinusunod lang naman namin yung IATF guidelines, of course, the social distancing procedures. So open na kami. And since alert level 1 tayo, we already accept visitors. So we're open Monday to Saturday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So just in case wala ako, there are others, Mr. Alfred Dialong, our assistant curator. So he's the one who could conduct a museum tour.
Thank you, Sir Mark Condeno, and thank you very much, everyone, for your active participation. And that concludes our open forum for today. Now, may I respectfully invite Director Kyungmin Bae of the UP Korea Research Center for the closing remarks. Prof. Kyungmin Bae.
안녕하세요. Thank you very much, Raymond and Sir Mark. Always, we are really fascinated by listening to your lecture because you are almost like Korean because you know Korean history in terms of the Korean War and then the friendship between two countries by heart and more than Koreans do. So we are always so thankful to have you in our KRC lecture. And then, like Sir Mark mentioned, UPKRC and UP community really hope to go back to tour in the museum, and we can also hopefully, when COVID really subsides, we can bring more students to the museum, and they can also meet you in person, and they can watch this fantastic video material in the theater inside your building. So once again, thank you so much, everyone, to join us. Like Sir Mark mentioned at the beginning, March is a very remarkable month for the Philippines and Korea because this is really the month that both countries really promised they will support each other as allies and then as friends. So in March, we also prepared for some exciting lectures. I think Raymond will also mention the upcoming events of UPKRC. So please tune in through our social media pages, and hopefully we can meet all of you again in our future events. So thank you so much and hope to see you soon. 감사합니다. Salamat po.
감사합니다. Salamat po. Ma'am.
네, 너무 감사합니다, 선생님 배. With that, we formally conclude today's event. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. For other updates or future events, please visit UPKRC's Facebook page and also visit UPKRC's YouTube channel later to access the recording of today's lecture. We hope to see you again in our future events. Thank you and have a safe and happy weekend. Kamsahamnida. Maraming salamat po.